This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight, we now bring you a discussion on implication of Biden Suga meeting and beyond. The participants are Anil Vadar, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist.
Today we are discussing the meeting between the US President Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister Suga. This is the first meeting that the US President has hosted in the White House since taking charge of the US administration, and both leaders discussed a wide variety of issues, but of course the major issue that everyone wants to discuss and was seen as being the major agenda between the two leaders is that of China. Ambassador Wadhwa, when we see the meeting between Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister and the actions of an aggressive, economically strong China in the region, how do you put the meeting in that context?
I think both sides would be very satisfied with this meeting. From the US perspective, the fact that the Japanese president was in the United States with an agenda which matched theirs, and at the same time, from the Japanese perspective, from the security point of view, from the pressure that they are feeling in the Taiwan Straits and also in the Senkakus, also the reaffirmation of the treaty between the United States and for the security of Japan, that's been an important takeaway from this visit.
Ambassador Wadhwa, when we see the fact that, Japan this time, it is being seen as for the first time that Japan has come out and criticized the human rights abuses in China, for instance. This is something that Japan has usually shied away from. Do you feel that Japan might be overcoming its past inhibitions, because it has to keep in mind the fact that China is Japan's largest trading partner? Do you feel that there might be a shift in Japanese stance and they might be willing to come out and confront China more on more issues like human rights and other aggressive issues of the Chinese behavior in, say, the South China Sea? Do you feel that happening?
Yes, I think this is quite a departure from the Abe era. After the change in leadership in Japan, obviously the Japanese have come out more strongly in terms of talking about human rights situation in Xinjiang and also as far as Hong Kong is concerned. So perhaps in this process they've been goaded and helped by the United States, which also wanted references in the joint statement, and that is exactly what has happened because it has suited both sides. So having been to the United States, not talking about Xinjiang would not have gone down very well in the United States as far as Japan is concerned. From that perspective, this is a major departure, but at the same time, it also reflects the mood of the times in the United States.
Ambassador Wadhwa, if we were to look at Quad, and we have seen that President Biden, he also hosted the virtual summit where we had the Quad leaders participate, and now you have this meeting between the President of the United States and the Japanese leader. How do you see the role of Quad developing in the near future, especially keeping in mind China? Because a lot of people have said that Quad is also essentially an alliance which will keep China in check. How do you see that evolving?
So the security aspect of the Quad is of great importance to the United States in particular. And if you look at the joint statement, both Suga and Biden have agreed to oppose any attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion. Obviously, this is something which is directed at China. And at the same time, they've been talking about the Taiwan Straits as well, which found a very prominent mention. So I think the peace and stability of Taiwan Straits, Japan and the United States, that's something which Chinese will take note of, because that's also first as far as Japan and China relationship is concerned. As far as the Quad is concerned, we see that the Quad has now expanded its agenda to about 10 different topics. So it's moved away from the pure security perspective into other areas. And that's been done deliberately, in my view, taking into account the sensitivities of ASEAN and also other countries who are participating in the Quad, because that gives the Quad much more of a legitimacy and acceptance going forward. It also means that the countries of the Quad will benefit from this participation. That will be more of an incentive for a longer lasting Quad which can build upon its achievements.
Ambassador Wadhwa, do you feel that with the new U.S. administration in place and we have President Joe Biden, whose policies seem to be, sometimes they are in sharp contrast to what we saw with President Donald Trump, do you feel that there seems to be again a departure from Trump policies even when it comes to China? Do you feel that Biden is willing to stick it out more and take on China more aggressively or more openly? Do you feel he's willing also to step up this alliance, Quad and other nations, to confront a very aggressive and growing China?
they have adopted a cooperative approach to dealing with China and an approach which takes other countries along in the process. So in that sense, it's a departure from the Trump administration, which was primarily going it alone, concentrating mainly on the trade and economic aspects of that relationship. And therefore, we saw a concentration on the trade wars. And that led on, of course, to the security aspect where, because there was dissatisfaction on the trade-related issues, that we also saw this spillover into the Quad, strengthening of the Quad, also talking about a common China front. So I think the process started in the Trump administration, but that's been taken up by the Biden administration in complete seriousness with a certain plan of action, with a comparatively cooperative kind of plan of action, which takes others along and which makes sure that US is not alone in this process because they feel that's the only way to keep China at bay given its aggressive policies in the region.
Mr. Vadra, we also see that one of the problems that whether it is the United States or it is India or any other nation in the world, one problem that one has dealing with China is that China is also an economic powerhouse today and every country is having trade and economic ties with China. How do you see US specifically and to some extent India also, how do you see this evolving in the future where we try to balance out the economic aspect of the relationship but also being able to push back China when it comes to issues like the freedom of navigation in the South China Sea? How is this balancing act going to be played out in the future?
If you look at the Japan-US competitiveness and resilience partnership which has been announced during this visit, you will see over there that there is a whole lot of cooperation steps that have been outlined. The United States is well aware that unless the dependence on China is reduced for the countries in the Quad and even others in the region, that it would be a losing battle. And therefore, this particular document which has come out builds on the already existing relationship between the US and Japan, but it also goes on to commit a further effort in this regard. For example, in the case of next generation mobile networks, which is 6G or beyond 5G, for example, United States and Japan have both committed $2 billion to this effort. They've also talked about US-Japan cooperation in third countries to launch a global digital connectivity partnership to promote secure connectivity and a vibrant digital economy while building the cybersecurity capacity of their partners to address shared threats. Obviously, that refers to China. And also in terms of US and Japanese ICT experts developing global standards, that again is something which is directed at China. Fourth issue is on cooperation on sensitive supply chains. That includes semiconductors and promotion and protection of critical technologies. Now coming out as a main battlefront between China and the United States. Also advanced biotechnology. And finally, we also know that Quad itself has agreed on a landmark Quad vaccine partnership with Australia, India, Japan, and the United States in order to strengthen and assist countries in the Indo-Pacific with vaccination. Building long-term global health security is something which will appeal to the ASEAN states as well. So all this is therefore directed against the spotlight which was on China and to provide a sort of alternate as far as the other countries are concerned, knowing fully well that the dependency on China was growing and that this dependency needs to be brought down together with other countries. So the United States is going about this, again, as I said, in a very systematic manner.
Mr. Vadra, there have been people who have pointed out that the optics of the meeting that happened between President Biden and the Japanese leader, and this meeting took place just days after Biden announced a withdrawal from Afghanistan. It also provides us maybe with the most visible sign yet that the United States and especially Biden is now determined to shift the center of gravity of the US foreign policy to the Indo-Pacific. Would you agree with that assessment?
Both these things go together. The effort that the United States was spending in Afghanistan is seen by the new administration as something of a dead loss. And they feel that these are wasted years, that the United States had no business being in Afghanistan and trying to police what is happening in the country and trying to fight the Taliban. When there are other people who can easily do that. In fact, the Afghan government which is in place should be doing it. This is their point of view. It's another matter that, when they withdraw from Afghanistan on the 1st of August, what will happen to Afghanistan and the region in particular is something that we have to look forward to with some amount of skepticism in India. But the effort, you are correct, has been shifted to the Indo-Pacific because what is important for the United States is that the Chinese aggressive actions in the region, and I can name at least four different theaters. Taiwan is one, top of the list. Senkakus with Japan is second. North Korea and the region is the third. And finally, the South China Sea, where the Chinese have actually altered the physical structures and have stationed their radars and artillery on man-made islands. And at the same time, they have changed their domestic law to ensure that the Coast Guard of China can now fire in self-defense, as they call it. So that's something which impinges directly on the freedom of navigation principle in the South China Sea and goes against the principle of UNCLOS as well. Although United States is not a party to UNCLOS, but it believes in free and open navigation and commerce. And that's something that the United States is definitely prepared to defend. And we are going to see much more of a presence of the United States there in future.
Ambassador Wadhwa, what is the takeaway for India as an observer? We look at this meeting happening in Washington, D.C. between the two leaders.
The opposition grows to the Chinese aggressive policies, the better it is for countries who are affected. And certainly all the countries in the Quad are affected. As far as India is concerned, it's facing the brunt of it because it shares a land border which is undemarcated and a very long land border. And we've seen what has happened since Salman last year in April. And going forward, we are still struggling to settle, the existing incursions and the positions that the Chinese have taken along our border. I don't think it's a process that will end very soon. So therefore, for us, any check on Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific is something which is welcome. Any resistance to Chinese attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion, which is something which found mention in the joint statement of Japan and the United States, is welcome. And again, the focus on Taiwan, on Xinjiang, on Hong Kong, etc., are all areas which are of concern to all peace-loving countries around the world. And countries who believe in the rule of law will be happy that, this conversation has taken place and at the same time certain decisions taken to counter this aggressive posture by the Chinese. Finally, I think India should be pleased also with the mention that their core document finds the core partnership document includes a reference to the Quad vaccine partnership between US, Japan, Australia and India, with India taking the center stage of the hub of manufacturing for vaccines in the Indo-Pacific.
Master Wadhwa, as you pointed out about the joint statement, and the joint statement which came out at the end of these talks very clearly said that we, that is the US and Japan, reiterated our objections to China's unlawful maritime claims and activities in the South China Sea and reaffirmed our strong shared interest in a free and open South China Sea governed by international law, in which freedom of navigation and overflight are guaranteed consistent with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. My question is that we have also seen that China has routinely dismissed or not really adhered to international law. Do you feel that the joint statement and the very direct message which has come out at the end of this meet might just push China now to abide more by the international law?
I think the progression towards occupation of islands in the South China Sea based on illegal claims has progressed to a certain point. It will be very difficult to dislodge them from the territories that they've occupied, even though this does not fall under international law. So obviously the Chinese will resist. But at the same time, if there is no resistance to this Chinese action, then of course unbridled expansionism. And therefore, from that point of view, the fact that there is an opposition now, which is growing, and if you see not only the countries of the Quad, but also countries who are in dispute with China and the others who are in the region, feel that this action is unjustified and that should be stopped in its tracks. So to that extent, I think the Chinese will think twice about getting more aggressive with other countries in the region. And unless this resistance by other countries continues, we will not be able to check this expansionism. It's a good development from that perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on implication of Biden Suga meeting and beyond. The participants were Anil Wadhwa, former diplomat, and Simran Sodhi, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our website, newsonair.com. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.